Hey, why not? I'm going to start promoting this now, okay? Saturday, October 24th. Gratitude Brewing, 1 p.m. Chuck Klosterman. You heard it right. Chuck Klosterman is coming to town for a live recording of the podcast. We'll be talking about his new book, Rock, a mainstream alternative history of alternative mainstream music, and his book, Football, and Writing, and Voice, and Style. He is singular, and you can see him in person. RSVP with a free ticket at the link in my newsletters and my Instagram profile at Creative Nonfiction Podcast, and I will continually promote it on Instagram for a while, for the next 2 months. The place will be packed. Secure your free ticket. It's only for a head count. You don't need to show the ticket. I hope to see you there.
Utterly diabolical. I mean, I don't know what kind of sadist designed the trail up there, but it stops being hiking for long stretches and becomes mountaineering. And I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to carry a backpack and a hike, and then you're confronted with these insane near vertical climbs where you have to go hand over hand.
Oh, hey, CNFers. Are we doing this again? Yeah, looks like it. It's Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. The art and craft of telling true stories. We've been doing this since 2013, right around the time I met your mom. Who do we have today? It's Earl Swift with his 10th book. He's the New York Times bestselling author of Chesapeake Requiem, and he makes his 4th trip to the podcast to talk about Up on Cove Mountain, adventure, tragedy, and a quest for meaning on the Appalachian Trail. It's published by Mariner Books, and what a book it is, as it recounts Earl's first hiking of the AT in 1990 and the happenstance, devoid-of-reason tragedy that befell 2 fellow southbound hikers, Molly LaRue and Jeffrey Hood. In that quest for meaning, Earl, now in his 60s, hikes the trail again to ponder the meaning of reason, luck, chance, and the enduring allure of the trail. Hey, show notes of this episode more are at brendanamaro.com. Hey, there you can find blog posts and links to the vast evergreen backlog of hundreds of conversations on this podcast. You can also sign up for the monthly issue of Pitch Club, my forever free Substack that helps you get better at selling stories. Or my flagship Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter, which publishes at the dawn of the full moon. It literally goes up to 11.
Make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder.
These go to 11.
You may also elect to become a patron at patreon.com/CNFpod to help with the show's ongoing operational costs, as well as get perks like the Sunday writing sessions or one-on-one calls with me to help you think things through. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help me out. Patreon.com/CNFpod. Free ways to support the show or just leaving ratings and reviews for the podcast. You can always use them. Always. And also ratings and reviews for The Frontrunner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine, which comes out in paperback in November. You can pre-order that now, just in time for the holidays. What a joy to welcome Earl back to the show. This is a toe-tapping good time. The toes were tapping. We started the conversation with how to handle a book advance, and then continue by asking what drove Earl to return to the AT, how flip-flopping the trail reflected the structure of the book, making the AT Chronicle feel fresh, trail angels, narrative wormholes, the people he relies on for story help, luck, how hiking the AT is like reading and writing, hiking your hike, how he kept track of the things on the trail, proportionality in the story, getting the reader to the last word, and how nonfiction is a construct. You can learn more about Earl at earlswift.com and follow him on Instagram at earl.swift. Parting shot and a great way to think or not think about sacrifice with audio I scrubbed from the internet. Ooh. Here's Earl Riff.
Does everyone know I'm a fucking genius?
Thank you. Everybody, remember what Brendan said.
We got in because we're sadistic motherfuckers.
Go lemurs.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
like for you, just like broadly speaking, when you get, let's say, that advance payment and how you're thinking of like, oh, I got to sock away this for like taxes. Like I can't like dip into that. And then you got to like spread that out. And you've clearly done it so well over the years because of the nature of the books you've written and how you're able to space it out. So how are you thinking that through?
Well, usually in a mild state of panic. I've never been comfortable with my financial standing. It's always an exercise in terror to just look ahead, at a book project and try to figure out exactly how you're going to make ends meet while you're researching it mostly.
Yeah.
And, I've been lucky in that I did back-to-back books for 10 years, basically, that I was able to have some overlap so that I was getting the last payment on one book while I was getting the first payment on another. And ideally, that's what you have to do, because one of the dirty little secrets, I guess, of the business is that when you get a book advance, you, of course, don't get it in a lump sum. You get it doled out to you according to your meeting a number of tripwires. You have to show progress in certain ways for you to get the next check, and often those checks are pretty small pieces, of the whole. So over the course of writing the 10 books, I've seen kind of the standard go from 3 payments to constitute an entire advance to 5 or more now, and so you're right. I mean, the balancing act is just trying to time it so that you don't have a huge gap between payments at any one point. Yeah. And even so, even when you carefully do it, taxes will always throw a wrench into a carefully devised plan, and always feel that you're playing, make you feel like you're playing catch up. I've only felt fat and happy a couple of times while doing it, and frankly, having hit 65 and qualifying for Social Security has been like one of the biggest stress relievers of my life. It's just to have that guaranteed payment every month is a game changer.
That's huge when you think about it, because as a freelancer or like as a book writer, you probably haven't had that degree of like regular payment since you were like a newspaper reporter, where you had like your biweekly check, and to have like that thing that you can actually kind of rely on. It's like, okay, This is going to cover some basic stuff. I'm going to be able to pay the mortgage or the rent or whatever, maybe off of this, or most of my groceries off of this. And then, it takes, I imagine, a lot of the strain off the finances.
And the other thing is if you've structured your advance payments so that you're getting one towards the end of the year. It can be tough to have very carefully engineered your whole year around the expectation that you'll have a certain amount of money you have to pay taxes on, and then get a payment like on December 28th. and it screws up everything. And you realize damn near half that payment's going to go to taxes because it fell 3 days earlier than it would have been nothing but a glide to receive. And,
oh my gosh. It's like with the front runner and the way my advance was structured, it was 3 payments, but I had such a short runway. I had like 14 months to basically research and write the book, the rough draft. I got my first lump, let's say right away. And then I was under the impression that when I met my deadline and submitted, that would be my next one. And it wasn't until it passed legal that I would get the next payment. That was news to me. And then suddenly I was a whole year without a payment. Thankfully I didn't need it. And my wife has a steady paycheck that allows us, we can pretty much live off of her salary. So, and I didn't dip too much into my book advance because she was worried I was going to miss my deadline and have to pay it all back. So she's like, don't spend it. She's like, I have a little faith in you making the deadline. And it did anyway. But that was illuminating for me. I was like, I was expecting that next payment then, and it didn't come. And then I got like 2 in quick succession the following year. So I went like a whole year without one, and then got hit with 2, bang, like almost back to back. So it's one of those things that people don't talk about, and I'm just grateful that you're sharing your experience.
Well, it's I'm not a great businessman. I'm not great running my own business. Right? It's a necessary evil. But I've gotten a little savvy over the years just thinking about, this book here is the second book of a 2-book deal. I'd have to think long and hard about whether or not I want to do another multi-book deal. On the one hand, it's enormously flattering to get a multi-book deal from a publisher that you've worked with for a while and that you really like and respect. And that's certainly the case with me and HarperCollins. But man, all the complication that comes with having an advance broken down into bits gets amplified 100 times when you've got 2 books and you're getting certain chunks of that advance credited to one book and not to the other. And you have no idea when the hell you're going to be paid. And it just becomes a complete mess. And so I just received my last payment on the 2-book deal. So I'm done with that. And time to start completely over from scratch. Get this whole thing again.
Oh my gosh. Did it feel like, I feel like the AT book was probably something, not that you had it in your back pocket for a while, but I imagine with your experience in 1990, what happened there, and then having hiked it basically in 24, like this was, even as you were working on the other book, like this one probably felt like, in terms of a story or a book idea, was kind of like in the bank, so to speak. Did it feel good that this was the second book of your of the 2-book deal, so to speak?
Well, it wasn't going to be initially. I have another book that I'm convinced is a great story. That was not a universal opinion. And, the people who really count in that decision-making process did not share that view with me, and at least not in its present form. I think if I went back and reframed it, maybe it would have a chance at a go. So, when I finished that first hike in 1990, I had no intention of writing about my experience at all. I went into the trail, having worked for newspapers at that point for about 10 years full time, and resolute that was going to be an experience I kept for myself. That I was not going there as a reporter. I knew that if I did, I'd have a very different experience. I'd be there looking for story instead of just hiking the trail. And so that remained my MO, right? Even after Molly and Geoff, the news about Molly and Geoff came to us. I still was resolved that this was going to be a solitary, personal experience, and that changed, I guess, to a slight degree, when I found myself struggling to find an answer for why it had happened, why their killings had happened, and that struggle persisted for months past the end of my hike. I had not expected that, and when I went to the trial, and I met their families, and there were so many fellow hikers, southbounders there at that trial, and it was kind of like this weird, unhappy reunion. It occurred to me, okay, there's probably a story that needs to be told here. And so I told a very early version of it for the newspaper, for the Virginian Pilot, and then told a more meatier and a story that a version that had the advantage of time behind it on the 25th anniversary for Outside, and thought that was it. I really kind of walked away from that Outside story saying, okay, I've exercised that demon to the degree I can. I'm done with the story. But, I got to the beginning, I guess, of working on, or to the beginning of actually writing Hell Put to Shame in 2022. And I, at that point, was hiking almost every day on the trail, banging out 5 miles every morning. And I got the itch to hike it a second time. And part of what really drove that itch was this continuing lack of resolution, this uneasy feeling that I didn't understand the world as well as I wanted to or should, and that the deaths of Molly and Geoff stood as evidence of that. That here was this huge a thing that had happened to people who I did not know well, but whose deaths really affected me at the time and continue to do so. And there was this big question mark attached to this episode, and it just it tapped into all of the questions I had about faith and about our place on the planet, as a species. It seemed worth exploring. It seemed worth investigating. And so I undertook the second hike both with a book in mind. That's why I structured it the way I did, as a flip-flop, but also not sure that there was a book there.
Yeah.
I basically went in not knowing whether I'd be able to pull off a book. So that's the groundwork for how I got to be there. That, it was very much, though, a hike engineered to reflect the structure of the book. And that came after I really did a lot of thinking, mostly while day hiking, about how do you structure this story so that it makes sense? How the hell can you write about this so that it has any immediacy, And that was a real challenge with this one. The structure it's an unusual structure, and it was hard to get to it.
Yeah, and you bring up the term flip-flop. So for people who are unfamiliar with that, what is a flip-flop when it comes to hiking the AT?
Like the PCT, most people start at one end and they hike to the other on the AT. The lion's share, 9 out of 10 people, start down in Georgia. They hike to Maine. It's a 2,200-mile trail. It takes 5-6 months to hike it for most people. The first time I hiked it from Maine to Georgia. So I was going against the grain. I was part of that 10% of hikers who do it that way. Well, in the years since my first hike, a third option has kind of emerged, and that's the flip-flop, in which you start in the middle. You hike to one end. In my case, I hiked from Duncannon, Pennsylvania, down to Georgia. Then you flip up, and you either go back to the middle and hike to the other end, or you go to the other end and hike back to the middle. And I did the latter. I flipped up to Maine and hiked back to Duncannon, Pennsylvania. And it's being encouraged by trail stewards because it helps alleviate some of the overcrowding that comes every spring when people start from Georgia to hike north. You have a mob scene down there. So this just kind of relieves the wear and tear on the trail.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense from, logistically, from a traffic point of view, too. Yeah, and beating the trail up. Because I imagine that first stretch in Springer Mountain where a lot of people start and a lot of people stop, it gets the shit kicked out of it right away.
Absolutely. It's like a war is taking place on the damn thing, and I liken that northbound horde to army ants in the book, and that really is kind of the effect that they have. They trample flat. They good luck trying to find an open bunk in a hostel during those that first couple of months of the hiking season. It just gets overrun completely.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot written about the AT over the years, and of course, you're able to bring a different kind of sensibility to it. So, but what were some of the apprehensions that you might have had, being like, how do I make this fresh and, like, to your point, like, kind of immediate to sit alongside all the other titles about the AT?
Well, I'm lucky in the sense that probably the two best books based on a trail journal, that recount a hike on the trail, were written by people who did not finish their hikes. Bill Bryson being one and Cheryl Strayed being the other. And most of the trail accounts that you read are self-published, unedited, written by folks with relatively little writing experience. And not to sound highfalutin, but it shows. They're tough to get through, and so I thought there was some room there for someone to come in and do a trail, chronicle. But the other thing is that I knew I had a story to tell with Molly and Geoff and what had happened there, and the only person who had really done much writing about that in the past was me, or outside. Yeah, and so it seemed to me I was pretty well suited to be the guy who told that story. The danger, of course, is that the book will wind up just one among 100 titles that recount trail journeys. but the opportunity was to be that one rare book about a trail journey that stands apart. And so I figured it was worth the risk to try to write that book.
Yeah. Yeah. And take us to, you already kind of alluded to it, that, when you were hiking in 1990, it was just a kind of a personal thing, and you weren't looking for a story, but in effect, the story found you.
Yeah.
And then, the person hiking it 33, 34 years later, what's the connective tissue you're seeing and your connection to the trail over that generation?
Well, after I finished, of course, when I hiked the first time, I did not live alongside the trail. I lived 3 hours away in Norfolk, and so after that first hike, I did not come back. I made a few weekend trips, backpacking trips onto the trail, but I didn't have a way to get out onto it on any sort of regular basis, and so I substituted all sorts of kind of low country excuses, for the same sort of experience. And I did a lot of bicycling, took up kayak paddling, and did a lot of kayaking. But, that always kind of pined to return to the rhythm of a long hike on the AT. And then in 2012, I won a fellowship, got a fellowship at UVA with Virginia Humanities, basically a writer in residence gig. And that brought me out to Charlottesville, which is 20 miles from the trail. And I started hiking 3-4 mornings a week. And pretty soon it had become the one part of the day that was, inviolate. I started every single day with a hike. And to the point that I decided to move closer to the trail. So I moved about 15 miles, 12 miles to the west to a little town called Crozet, lived there for a couple of years, moved closer still to the trail after that. And so now I live at Rockfish Gap. You can practically see the trail from my place. And it's, it's kind of driven, it's been the organizing principle of my daily life, is being close to the trail. There is something about being on a footpath that stretches 850 miles in one direction and 1,350 in the other. And that you can step onto it and not get off if you organized yourself correctly for all of those miles. You can just cruise. It's weirdly alluring to me, and I wish I could explain to you why it is that I find it so alluring. I'm not sure I know, but I do know that when you have everything you need, not only to survive but to live pretty damn comfortably on your back, that's a level of freedom that you don't experience every day. It's just enormously liberating.
Yeah. Well, there a moment in the book you write, like, one of my chief objectives out here is to escape my complex, harried life for a simpler, more deliberate form of existence, a goal I can't very well achieve without loosening my tether to the grid. And I love that sense of reorienting yourself and letting the trail defrag you from the modern life. Yeah. And it does. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't take advantage of that. You see a lot of, especially younger hikers out there who are as married to their phones as they ever were back in the city. But the first thing you have to do is put that damn phone away. I mean, that's key. Yeah, as you were hiking south and getting into Georgia, where you were starting to experience a lot of the congestion of people starting their northbound thing, you also write a generational divide is afoot at Low Gap and other campsites, manifested by the fact that younger hikers seem predisposed to tenting no matter what, even a middle of a downpour. They'll choose their individual shelter over the communal, and then there's the isolation and the phones that you were noticing as well. So it's like that's something maybe 30 years ago you didn't see, but now in this age, it's probably like, oh wow, that's illuminating in its own right.
Yeah, well, of course you didn't see it 30 years ago, so there were no phones. I mean, we forget that the smartphone didn't come along until 2007. So it was a full 17 years after I hiked that first hike. I mean, it was a very different environment back then. This is 8 years before Bill Bryson wrote A Walk in the Woods, and the trail did not occupy a spot really in the collective consciousness at all. It was not part of American culture the way it has become since. And so you were dealing with people who were drawn from a much narrower bandwidth of society. There were people who were already outdoorsy, and that's not necessarily the case now. You have people from all walks who attempt to through hike these days, but back then it tended to be people who were already part of the fraternity. And it was if you wanted to make a call, you hitchhiked to the nearest town and went to a payphone. There was no option. That was what you had to do. If you wanted a pizza, you had to hitch into town. If you want, And now you have people who will get on their phones when they're 2 miles from the nearest road crossing, and they'll arrange for a pizza joint to deliver a pie at the road crossing at the same time that they get there, which that was science fiction in 1990. That wasn't even on anyone's radar that would be a possibility, let alone kind of standard operating procedure at a certain point down the road.
Yeah, and I love your chronicling of so many of the various trail angels and the people who offer rides, and the willingness of people to offer just hitchhiking, and it's so like almost anathema to what we experience day to day, but in the trail ecosystem, that is par for the course. Yeah,
it would be a much tougher trip without that incredible support network that has sprung up along the trail's flanks. And I've thought about, well, what motivates people to do that? And I think that a big piece of it is that there's great romance attached to the idea of taking this journey, and rightly so. It's a pretty cool thing, but the vast majority of Americans will not be able to take 6 months off from their work to go do something like this. It's enormously self-indulgent. Most people don't get anything tangible out of it. They get a lot spiritually and mentally and certainly physically out of it, but you don't come out of it necessarily, richer in any sort of material way for the experience. And so it's hard for a lot of people to justify taking the time to do it, but that does not take away at all from their appreciation of the romance of the endeavor. And so I think a lot of trail angels experience the hike vicariously by having just a little piece of it and getting to help the people who are out there doing it. And thank God for them.
Yeah, there's a number who experience a trail themselves, be it a full through hike or through various section hikes, but then some of them have purchased certain hostels that maybe they stayed at along when they hiked it 40 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and that's their way of staying connected and bound to it, and then paying forward what the trail gave them to other people seeking that same kind of enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you've got people like Elmer Hall in Hot Springs, North Carolina, who's in his 80s now, who hiked the trail, I think, in 1976. I may be off by a year or two on that, but bought a mansion at the edge of Hot Springs, its downtown area, in 1978, I think, and opened a hostel. And he's operated it since. And now the fact that Elmer was a thru hiker at one point is almost lost. He is the guy who runs the Inn at Hot Springs and has run it wonderfully for half a century, damn near. And I would be surprised if he considers it giving back to the trail. I think it's just that he tapped into something while he was on the trail that he recognized was really important, and has devoted his life to it since.
Yeah, and so integral to your telling of this book too is Molly and Geoff, and almost the ghosts of them. It's almost like a ghost story in that sense, that not in that they're haunting, but their presence is very much with you, certainly in 1990, and now what you carry, with them, the fact that you were just ahead of them before they were tragically killed. It's when you were conceiving of this and their presence of it, how, to what extent did you just feel them with you, certainly in the hike, but also in the writing?
I mean, they drove the whole story. The reason I did a flip-flop was so that I could start in Duncannon. And I had to start in Duncannon because that's where their hike ended. And also there was no other way to tell the story as near as I could tell. If I did another southbound through hike started in Maine and just went straight to Georgia. I could recount their story pretty well, but I'd run out of story. Their story would end halfway through the hike. I mean, that's where their hike ended. And so what I realized I had to do was to somehow structure this thing so that I could use geographic waypoints along the trail as wormholes between past and present. So I get to a certain geographic point where something happened in 1990. This is on my 2024 hike now. I get to this significant place, and I'd be able to drop back into 1990 and then reemerge into 2024 and keep going to the next waypoint. And then so what that would do was I'd be able to, with the southern half of my hike, the first half of it, I'd be able to tackle everything that happened to them, the crime itself, because that was not dependent on geography except for my beginning point in Duncannon, which is 4 miles from where they died. And then with the second half of my hike, where the geographic stuff did matter because that's where I overlapped with them back in 1990, I'd be able to use the wormholes, pretty steadily as a really reliable way to flip back and forth, toggle between past and present. It took a while to figure out exactly how to make that work. Hopefully it does. I got to the point where I was comfortable with it, but the enduring question mark for me, having written the book and sent it into the world, is will others find that structure works for them as well as it works for the guy who wrote it? And, I hope so.
It certainly feels cohesive in that way that you're able to do that. And I love that that wormhole imagery that you're able to just drop through to a different, like a time machine, and this is where it's congruent. And you've worked with Peter Hubbard on several of your books, and I imagine you guys were having a dialogue around that. What were those conversations like?
Well, it's interesting because Peter and I had lots of dialogues, but we never really talked. We never talk about the internal workings of a story while I'm working on it. It's, this is my 5th book working with him, and he's a great, super smart guy to work with. We talked in general terms about backpacking, about the story in very, very kind of broad strokes. Now, he got the backpacking bug while I was working on this and took up backpacking himself. And in fact, when I went in a year after the 2024 hike, went back to Massachusetts to look for the little memorial to Molly and Geoff that the ATC put just off trail, and which I could not find on my hike. He went with me. We did that as we hiked together to find it. And he actually took the picture of the blaze, the trail blaze that appears on the cover of the book.
Oh, cool.
He did that on his first backpacking trip in
Nice.
He did the state of Connecticut on the AT. And that tree is somewhere in Connecticut.
Nice.
But we never really did have we don't get into the internal mechanics of a story unless I bring up a question for him. And I've never felt the need to do that. I have a couple of people, old friends, who kind of play that role with me. One is my story doctor / stern taskmaster, Laura LaFay, who lives in Richmond, she's about 2 hours away, and who was my desk mate at the Virginian Pilot when I got there in 1987.
Oh, wow.
Spectacular writer, scary smart, just a really, really well-read person who has a great sense of story, what works, what doesn't. She is probably the person I take conversations like that to the most often, followed very closely by my friend Mark Mobley, who lives down in Athens, Georgia. And Mark is, Laura will get down into the level of the sentence with me. Mark is kind of more of a big, holistic, the view from 10,000 feet kind of guy to consult with. Nice. And so between the two of them, I've got great fonts of feedback, and if I'm dealing with a really thorny thorny questions structurally or otherwise. They're pretty reliable.
And a big element of your book as well is this is luck in general. There are so many close calls that you experience in 1990 and even in the 24 hike. I mean, that element of luck you wrestle with, I mean, it just compounds all the questions of why things happen to other people and not yourself. And I really like that element of it as well.
Yeah, that's kind of the central thesis right there, is that luck figures into our lives to a degree that we'd be really uncomfortable about if we gave it a lot of thought, I think. Just to get through the day, to survive the day, involves a pretty heavy measure of luck. And I'm no better example of that. Or I'm the best example of that, rather than you'll find. It's I'm an incredibly lucky guy. And,
I mean, gosh, in 1990, there's the big tree that split you and Greg. Like, that would have just pancaked one of you into the ground. And then even on your 24 hike, there was just like you were just avoided a kind of a widowmaker limb, fell out of a tree, and it's all these things. And if you leave 5 minutes earlier, or if you roll over one particular way in your tent, and then suddenly you're in the path of a tree limb or a full tree. It's like, my gosh, it's and then what happens with Molly and Geoff, that it was just a nonsensical killing. It could have been anyone, but it was them. So.
Exactly. I mean, that first tree fall, Greg Hammer and I made camp at Crawford Notch. We were camping illegally, and I guess this is payback for that. But of all the trees in the forest that could have fallen, it happened to be this tree at the edge of our campsite. And of all the ways that tree could have fallen, it performed a surgical strike. So it fell in exactly the way it had to not kill us. And any variation of that exact way by more than inches would have done the job. I mean, it would have either crippled Greg or smashed my head flat. And it still boggles my mind. It still gives me the creeps to think about waking up to that concussive thud, the loudest sound I've ever heard to this day, and sticking my head out of the tent and having my view blocked by something lying just outside. It was big, It was crazy.
Yeah, and also, about 2/3 of the way through the book, you just remember comment on like not remembering a certain Bear Rock struggle that you experienced, say, in 1990 versus 24, and it just seeing that it reminded me of just like rereading a book, and how sometimes you're like, oh, I don't remember that, but like we kind of age around something that is static, and you notice new things, or new things take on different meaning based on your distance from having that original experience. And I love some of these little grace notes that I was like, oh, hiking this trail is a lot like writing and reading too.
It really, that's a great point. I mean, people ask me, well, when they found out that I was thinking about hiking the trail again, well, don't you want to do a different trail? Why go back to something you've already done? And I was like, it's not the same trail, because I'm not the same hiker. Yeah. It's a completely different experience when you do it 34 years later. It's not the same trail. You don't remember. You remember some highlights, but they strike you in a different way the second time around. They're not highlights in the same exact way. So I remember I've had books that changed my life at the time I read them, and then I go back and reread them years later, and they don't have nearly that profound an effect. They just kind of leave me feeling lukewarm about them, and it's not because the book's changed, it's because the reader has, and the trail kind of works that way too.
Yeah, and there are fundamental ways that the trail has changed in the last generation and a half, and a lot of that we can credit to climate change and climate catastrophe too. A lot of the streams that you were expecting to fill up your bottle and filter water are like bone dry, experiencing wildfires in places where you expect that in the West, but not on the East Coast, and certainly not in the Smoky Mountains in that area of the country. So, just what did you notice that climate changes, affect on the environment?
Well, I mean, just this summer, trying to day hike has been a challenge because we've had just scorchingly hot days. And it's just, I have a hard time getting motivated to get out there among the rattlesnakes when it's 100 degrees out. I mean, give me one hazard at a time, please, and I'm pretty comfortable. But any year, and this goes back to World War II and beyond. I mean, any year, you get to September and springs and streams in parts of Virginia and all through Pennsylvania are going to be dry. I mean, that's always been the case. They dry up. I don't know if it's because the aquifers are pretty close to the surface and they're not all that robust even in their wettest conditions or what. But those two places, that mid-Atlantic stretch of the trail is always susceptible to a late summer drought. And I experienced that in 1990. This is different. This time I had trouble finding water from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, all the way to the end of the trail, the end of my hike. And that's pretty doggone unusual. Streams and springs that are viewed as fail-safe were completely spent. And so that was a pretty telling indication to me that there's something afoot. And of course the wildfires that you mentioned, I had five of them, I think, that I had to dodge on this hike. Didn't have any in 1990. And at the same time then, halfway through my hike, Helene hits the southern half of the trail and just completely does a number on it. Wrecks Asheville and Irwin and Hot Springs, the tavern that Greg and I celebrated our successful hike through the Smokies in. 1 month gets completely flooded neck deep, by the French Broad River. A couple months later, it's an issue that's going to get more pronounced, clearly as time goes on, and through hikes are going to become more challenging and a bigger logistical hassle. When by a certain point in the midsummer now, there's no water to be found in the whole middle 700 miles of trail. I don't know how you get around that exactly.
Yeah, the other bellwether of it also is the death of moose in sort of the North Country. There were ravaged by ticks that I think used to die off during the winter, or they weren't born as late, hatching as early as they do. And you note that there have been moose with 100,000 ticks on their bodies. It's like, God, just getting bled to death.
Hard to imagine a 1,200-pound animal being killed by tiny little pinhead insects, but arachnids rather. But that's what's happening. They're in parts of Maine. There's a 90% die-off rate among calves. They're just not surviving to adulthood, and it's because climate change has affected the poles to a degree that it hasn't the middle of the planet yet, and Maine is experiencing warmer winters, and so that not only is doing a number on moose, but it's probably the number one health hazard for thru hikers, for human thru hikers, is tick-borne illness right now. Hikers are loath to carry a liquid bug repellent that weighs a few ounces. It's hard to get them to do it, and so picaridin and DEET that would protect them from Lyme disease, that gets left behind, and they go out and they wind up sick 6 months after they finish their hikes. Now we've got another tick-borne illness that's running rampant through the population, alpha-gal, which is carried by the Lone Star tick. You probably don't have it in Oregon yet, but here in the East, it's become a real problem, and it leaves you with an allergy to mammalian meat and mammalian byproducts like anything dairy. My daughter has it. My daughter has alpha-gal, and it's been she's had to really adjust her, kind of rearrange her whole life around the fact that she can't even, for instance, she can't go to a football game where people are tailgating by grilling burgers because the smoke contains enough juice that it can set off her allergy.
Oh my gosh, a little, not that there are bugs, but like a little bug. I imagine setting off a cascade of hell like that, just that little thing.
Yeah, and you talk to people who don't treat Lyme disease right away, and hell is what it is. I mean, it's a bad illness to acquire.
Yeah, well, Victoria Stopp, a Goucher alum,
That's
Yeah,
what I was
she's
thinking
been
of.
yeah, she's been wrestling with the effects of Lyme disease for gosh, almost as long as I've known her.
Yeah.
For the last 10 or so years. It's it can be
Yeah.
debilitating.
And here's a total athlete. She's a great runner. Laid low by it for a good while. She's pretty much back to fighting trim now, but that was tough going.
Yeah. When you bring up Maine, talk about Maine and the 100-mile wilderness, Katahdin, and it's a pretty harrowing part of the book because you really feel the weight and the just how punishing Maine can be in your telling.
Utterly diabolical. I mean, I don't know what kind of sadist designed the trail up there, but it stops being hiking for long stretches and becomes mountaineering. And I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to carry a backpack and a hike, and then you're confronted with these insane near vertical climbs where you have to go hand over hand. And which would be a lot of fun if you didn't have 40 pounds of pack on your back and throwing off your balance and, raising hell in all kinds of ways. Yeah, Maine, I actually just went back in June and re-hiked a chunk of the Mahoosics, which are, for my money, the toughest part of the whole trail. I came away thinking, God, that I don't want to hike that again. That was hard. It was, and we're talking, once you get through of course, Maine contains the end of the trail, which is Katahdin, this mile-high mountain that stands off by itself in the middle of a vast, very primitive state park in inland Maine, up in the North Maine woods. And then, so if you're a southbounder, you hike Katahdin, and then your second day after you've hiked Katahdin, this 4,000-foot punishing climb, you enter the 100-mile wilderness. And so for the next week to 10 days, you are incommunicado for all practical purposes. And you're really without an easy way to get the heck off the trail. You're glued to it. For the first 50 miles or so of that 100-mile wilderness, you're in a mud slog, ankle-deep mud and roots. Just slippery. It's a slippery, messy bog. And then for the second half of the 50 miles, you're just getting pounded continuously by these crazy vertical climbs and going over just nutso country. Then you get out of the 100-mile wilderness and you think, boy, am I glad I'm done with that. And then comes Western Maine. And everything you've done so far turns out to be just an easy warm-up for Western Maine. Because, man, the Bigelows and the Mahoosics are where it gets serious. And yeah, it's just the 282 miles of toil.
Yeah, and you feel every mile of that for sure. That particular section in the book has my favorite sentence of the book. You write, a great unbroken sweep of woodland stretching 50 miles or more, sprinkled with ponds that reflect the sun and sky and glow like sapphires in a carpet of deep green. And I just love that sentence.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that's the view from Katahdin. It's, climbing Katahdin is entirely, the kind of experience you have is almost completely dependent on the weather. It hangs off by itself, kind of creates its own weather in a way. The first time I climbed it, I did it in 1990 on my first day, and I don't really have much recollection of the climb, which tells you that I didn't find it, life-threatening or life-changing in its difficulty. But it was also like 70 degrees and sunny. Without so much as a breeze. It was a perfect day to climb a mile-high mountain. This last time, it was about 65 degrees down at the bottom of the mountain, and as we started up, the weather started to go south, and it was 18 degrees with a very, very almost hurricane force wind blowing up at the top at times. It would gust to that. It was a white knuckle, terror-filled ride all the way. I honestly thought that I might be swept off the mountain as I was climbing up over the boulders on the Hunt Spur. And that was not an idle worry. I mean, the wind was strong enough that I really thought that could happen. So it's so much about the trail experience varies by the hour. And, the people who hiked it a day after I did had a completely different experience maybe. And so, the every through hike is a unique thing unto itself. It's everybody who does it has a very different experience, not only because of, they're processing it differently internally, but because the trail looks different day to day, hour to hour.
Yeah.
It can morph completely in the space of minutes.
Yeah, and I love some conversations you have throughout with various passerby about maybe there's a purist who thinks you can't really deviate from the trail, or some people who are against section hiking or however, and you're always or someone asking advice like, if I do this, does it count? And you're like, hike your hike. Like, that's the thing. Like, you hike your hike, and I love that sentiment. Even as a means of a writer and a writing career, it's like our paths are so weird and divergent to get this work done. Like, so in what way would you counsel, or even in your own experience of like, even in a writing career, that you got to just like hike your hike, run your race?
Yeah. That's it. Any advice that I could give about a writing career would be almost worthless, because I can't explain how the hell
I feel the same way too. Yeah.
There's been luck has figured so prominently in virtually every positive turn that I've been lucky enough to enjoy, that, to suggest that I actually had anything to do with it, that it was part of the strategy, is laughable. It's, that's not true at all. People have chosen to be remarkably generous to me for reasons that I cannot fathom. And timing has just worked out in weird and perfect ways, when it so easily could not have. Chesapeake Requiem became a bestseller through the most unlikely chain of events. Barnes & Noble gets bought, has a change of management. Their new CEO happens to read the book on a transatlantic flight, takes a liking to it, makes it Barnes & Noble's book of the month, the very month that COVID hits, and all of America goes to Barnes & Noble to buy books for what they think is going to be a 2-week lockdown, and they all buy Chesapeake Requiem, bestseller. I had nothing to do with it, I wrote that book a year and a half earlier, and the book enjoyed a very nice reception, but it certainly wasn't a bestseller before COVID hit.
It's so wild, those things out of your control, how certain things can be a bestseller, or your book publishes the same week as another one that just takes all the oxygen out of the room.
Absolutely.
So many things, like, not that the front runner was ever going to shoot up any list, but it came out the same week as that Original Sin book by Jake Tapper and the other guy about Joe Biden and the presidency there. And that book just took all the oxygen out of the entire literary ecosystem that week. And it was like, well, any shot that any other book had a chance at moving up any list, getting any degree of attention, was moot. It was never going to happen. And you can't control that stuff.
Yeah, you can't. And great in that case to be Jake Tapper. Sucks to be everybody else. I mean, and you've spent 2 years of your life waiting for that moment. And when you see that happen, it can be a pretty heartbreaking way to make a living.
Yeah, and Glenn Stowe, who wrote The Young Woman in the Sea, among many other books, about Trudy Ederle, that book came out in, I think, 2003 or something, a long time ago. Roughly 20 years later, a random guy finds it in a used bookstore. That random guy happens to be a filmmaker who's like, I want to adapt this as a movie for my daughter, because it's an empowering female athlete story. And through a lot of fits and starts, it eventually becomes a movie from Disney starring Daisy Ridley. Total luck. A great book. Had to be a great book to be noticed and to want to be adapted, but it was plucked out of a used book bin and becomes a movie. It's like, these are the things that are like, you drive yourself mad trying to chase that. All you can do is like lean into the work and cross your fingers.
Yeah, well, look at Theo of Golden. I mean, talk about an unlikely story.
Yeah.
A guy self-publishes, and then it turns into an international bestseller. That's that's lightning striking. It's
Yeah.
rare. It's rarer than lightning striking. Hell, it's crazy, but it happened. And
Yeah.
but for every
I'd love.
story like that, there are a million of books that did not get discovered.
Yeah. When you were on the trail and everything, of course, you're very cognizant of what you're carrying with you, but you're a journalist and a writer at heart, and so you got to take notes and keep things with you. So, how are you recording your, your day to day and keeping track of things?
Well, insofar as I was a southbounder, I did not have a lot of conversations to record, so that streamlined the process significantly. I kept a detailed journal. I wrote for at the end of the day. So usually I would get into my sleeping bag under the quilt a good hour before I planned to turn off my headlamp and get it done then. And rarely, occasionally would take notes pull out the notebook and take notes during the day. But mostly what I did during the day as I was actually hiking was I just took pictures. And I was able to marry the photos to particular points on the trail just by their timestamps. And and so when it came time to get home and to integrate all of this stuff, it was pretty easy to do. And I also had a very, I was using an app for the second half of the hike that made it pretty easy to track where I was on the trail, on the map. And that map was augmented with various geological and other formations and points of interest. So I was able to pretty thoroughly reconstruct the experience. Didn't have to put together a document that brought the photos in, but I had to use the photos to create the document.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had the photos off to one side, and then did build a massive chronological document with all of my notes, all of the peripheral reporting I had done before and after the hike included in that, and then had a separate document consisting of the Molly and Geoff case and all of the detail I was able to dig up on that, and then built initially a chronological narrative out of the hike, built a parallel narrative about Molly and Geoff, and then just broke them up. First of all, I had to pare down the hike part of it by 80%.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Really whack it down. Because I had a 1990 hike that I had to include in that too, which of course was another braid that I had to build it as a chronology. And really the hiking part was strictly chronological. I mean, that was not hard to do. And it was not hard to overlay 1990 on 2024. The challenge was, how do you unspool what happened to Molly and Geoff in a way that doesn't give away the whole story too early, and that plays on the kind of randomness of what happened to them.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to have that be a slow reveal, their story to be a slow reveal, and not necessarily in sequence. So that, and what I decided to do was pretty much tell the story as I learned it, which was out of sequence. I didn't find out about it until 5 days or so after they died. And the information about how all that had happened came to me piecemeal, and it spread out over time. And so that's pretty much the way I bring it about in the book as well. And as you know, I mean, the big challenge, when the real difference between writing, say, a magazine feature story and a book is not the sitting down and having to type it out or anything. It's or the length of the story per se. It's organizing all of the material you have to amass to tell that story, and just managing that huge amount of material. And in this book, really, the amount of material I had to manage was a lot less than it usually is, because usually I wind up with several cubic feet of of notes out of libraries and archives and whatnot, and
Yeah.
documents. And there were no documents per se here, except for my journals. Yeah, that was pretty much it. So once those were in the computer, they were out of the picture. I didn't have to mess with those anymore.
Yeah, there's a challenge in the balance of what to include on the hike, so that just doesn't feel repetitive, because you need to pick these high intensity moments, be it the physical experience of a gnarly section of trail or just some 3 siblings from Kentucky who are just these assholes with no etiquette, or this MAGA guy who drives you, shuttles you up the trail, and you like chastise him for this is inappropriate how you are leaning, going into all this. And so you pick these moments and then sprinkle Molly and Geoff throughout, so that it's not front loaded or middle loaded or back loaded. So there's this there is a delicacy of how you deploy various elements throughout.
Yeah, well, like any storyteller, I mean, proportionality is the key ingredient. Figuring how much of each piece you share with the reader, and I think that if there is one fatal flaw in most trail chronicles, it's that the writers don't make enough of a distinction between telling moments and untelling moments. They just throw everything at you, and it gets really boring. Yeah. And even some classic. I mean, there are relatively few classic books about the AT, but one of them came up really early. Came in the late 70s. It's this 2-volume, 1,000-page book called "Hiking the Appalachian Trail." It was put out by Rodale Press of Pennsylvania, and it's a hoss. and what it does is it gives you first-person accounts of like the first 50 or so through hikes. You start reading that thing, and by 100 pages into the first volume, you've gone numb, because every story is pretty much exactly the same. I mean, that there's not a lot of variety there. And part of the problem is the readers, the whole tenor of the story is this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there's never a moment's pause to reflect on, well, what does that mean? Why should I care? Why is that important? Everything's treated as equally important, and therefore nothing is important.
Yeah, I imagine that was a degree to which you were always interrogating what you were putting in, and that comes from years of experience too, of knowing I have my thumb on the scale of this particular story. I'm the tour guide for this story, and I'm going to point to what matters. And this is why I'm telling you this, and this is pointing over there, see that landmark, this is why this matters. And that degree of authorial authority is so integral to any narrative, especially something of this, because otherwise it would just be so rote and beads on a string and boring. But you have to imbue it with something, a pulse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our first job one for anybody writing a book, anybody writing a story of any kind, any length, is to get the reader to that last word. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter what pretty words you drop in the middle of the story. It doesn't matter how brilliantly conceived it is. The story has failed, because you have failed to get the reader to the end, to the finish line. You got to get the reader there. So the whole process of structuring a story and strategizing about a story comes down to, how do I remove all the speed bumps to prevent, that will encourage the reader to set this aside. And if you can do that effectively, then you win. You get the reader to finish the story. And no matter if the reader can badmouth the story after the fact, if the reader's gotten to the end, you as the writer have achieved what you set out to do. That's all you can ask for, is for them to finish the story. You can't ask them to like it. That's up to them. But you can get them to finish it if you do it right. And nonfiction is a construct just as surely as fiction is. We make decisions about what we include and what we leave out. We decide where we start a story, which is not always at the beginning. We decide where we're going to end it, which is not always the ending. And so you hope that in making those decisions, you get the reader to the truth, or pretty damn close to it, as close as you can. given the facts that you're working with. But it is a construct, and it is your responsibility, it seems to me, to structure your story in such a way that the story will achieve what it sets out to do, that it will succeed, in terms of incorporating enough propulsion to get the reader to the end. And so the whole idea of throwing down everything I had, doing a notebook dump of the second hike, and then going in and just chopping. And I probably spent 3 months doing nothing but cutting. Most of the writing of this book was cutting. I wrote a journal while I was hiking, and then I did nothing but cut when it came to actually writing the book.
Yeah.
And with each cut, you start off with a chainsaw. It's like doing a sculpture. You start off with the big swings of the hammer, and then you get to the fine stuff the further into it that you go. Eventually, it got to the point where it seemed to be moving at a pretty good clip throughout, and I could stop cutting.
Yeah. Well, in what ways did the hike change you in 1990, and how did it change you in 2024?
Well, in 1990, the big takeaway for me was that I could do anything. It just boosted my confidence to the point where I'm sure I was pretty obnoxious in the months immediately after my hike. God knows I must have been difficult to deal with. I could do anything. It made me Superman, and part of that was seeing demonstrated daily something my dad had been saying to me for years at that point. He was always big on saying, "How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time." And it had just been dad talk to me until this hike, when I realized part of being able to do anything is knowing how to bust it up into its components, and then bust those components up into their individual ingredients, those into theirs, and then take each little bite-sized fragment that's left and take them in sequence, and pretty soon you've accomplished the whole thing. And that kind of dictated my approach to big assignments at the paper and in magazines, and certainly it has informed every book I've written, because it's a stupid amount of work to write a book. I mean, I wouldn't recommend this line of work necessarily to anybody. It's a ridiculous way to try to make a living. Yeah. So uncertain, so filled with terror. And so potentially without reward of any kind. To the vast majority of people who do it, that's the case. But there's no doubt that the trail and breaking the 2,200 miles into daily doses of 14 to 17 miles describe perfectly how I go about writing a book now. You don't sit down to write 105,000 words. You sit down to write 1,000 words, 1,200 words a day. And that's my daily quota, is 1,200 words. And, you do that over enough days, and pretty soon you have the 105,000 words. And,
yeah. How'd you settle on 1,200?
Well, early on, my first couple of books, it was 2,000. And I just whacked it down since. I just find it my first hike, I had no trouble banging out 17 to 20 miles a day. And now 14 feels pretty like a tough day at the office, a long day. It's the same with writing. 1,200 words takes as much out of me now as 2,000 used to, I think.
Yeah.
And next book, I'll probably drop it down to 1,100, maybe even 1,000. I'd like to think that the words are better than they used to be. Don't know that that's the case at all. I still find that I spend the first hour or two every morning in the middle of a book project going back through what I thought were perfect words laid down the day before. And almost invariably, I'll wake up, and find that they weren't so perfect after all. In fact, need a lot of fixing. And so I do repair for the first couple of hours, and then try to make something out of the rest of the day with new stuff.
Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, you certainly made the most out of your writing days with this book. I truly loved it. It was great company, and When I saw the post on Instagram that you had this new book coming out a couple months ago, I'm like, oh shit, I gotta get in line for this one. So glad I did it. It didn't disappoint at all. So yeah, it's just Earl. Thank you so much as always for taking the time to talk some shop. Your 4th time on the pod.
I'm totally psyched that that's the case. I enjoy it so much, Brendan. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Earl for coming back on the show for nearly half of the books he's written. Be sure you pick up a copy of Up on Cove Mountain wherever you buy books, and follow the show on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast, as well as subscribing to the extended network of newsletters I make for you, my friend. As much as I hate social media, the algorithm fed me a really insightful reel from the runner Henrik Ingebrigtsen, the brother of Jakob Ingebrigtsen, 2 Norwegians, elite runners. Jakob is a gold medalist and world record holder, and the most versatile middle distance runner since Steve Prefontaine. But this video focuses on Henrik. And so take a listen right now of how Henrik views sacrifice. Then I'm going to come back and riff on it. It's about a minute. Take it all in.
I think it's very interesting when people talk about all of their sacrifice and all that stuff. In my head, there's no sacrifice. I'm setting a goal and I'm doing everything I can to reach that goal. If you're talking about sacrifice, then you don't really want this, right? I didn't sacrifice anything. Of course, I chose to spend my time doing this. I traveled. I spent a lot of my time on this stuff instead of, all my other interests or friends or family or whatever. But if you're just being honest with yourself about what are your true ambitions, right? Goals, then of course all your choices that brings you closer to that it can't be a sacrifice.
It's such an interesting phrasing, right? Like, of course, to realize our goals, we have to make sacrifices. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just making the right choices that align with our goals. This resonated with me so much as I have some ambitious marathon goals that I'm constantly reevaluating based on fitness and body comp and age. Henrik didn't see the choices he made or makes as sacrifice. Rather, they were in alignment with his ultimate goals of being a world-class runner, which he is. I don't know what that looks like for him, what he's, let's just say, giving up. But let's use me as an example with my running today, my obsession du jour. And this will extrapolate to writing as well. I so often see giving up my beer habit or pleasure-seeking grub as sacrifice in the name of a goal. And yeah, it feels kind of like FOMO, like, I'm giving this thing up because I got a blah, blah, blah. And yes, if you want to accomplish a running goal, you need great nutrition and sleep and recovery. And alcohol and junk food, especially at age 46, can't be overcome no matter how many miles you log. Yeah, my FOMO of not enjoying my favorite beers often keeps one foot in the beer world and the other foot trying to accomplish an ambitious physical goal, and they cancel each other out, and it just leaves me spinning my tires and very frustrated. The two can't really exist together, not in their current form. And I've long seen it as a sacrifice, that I'm giving up something, losing something. The loss of the vice is stronger than the vision of the goal. That goal has to be so strong that indulging these vices, in fact, sacrifices and sandbags the ultimate goal. That's the sacrifice. When your goal is so crystallized and so important to you, then there are no sacrifices, only smart choices that inform the end. That end. And I don't want to look back and be like, why did I have 6 beers that day and then had that crushing hangover and then missed that important workout, or made the workout but it wasn't as good as it could have been because I slept like shit, and then the workout was bad, and then, these blocks, they build on each other. And if you have a shitty brick that breaks under the weight of the other ones, you're compromising things that are coming down the road. And the same can be true for writing a book. If you really want to pursue that project, then giving up an hour of Netflix a week isn't a sacrifice. It's an investment in this goal you say you want. And when we succumb to those seductions and bad habits, we have to interrogate just how important that goal is to us. If the goal is as important as we purport it to be, then the decision is made. Big, ambitious goals take ambitious habits. I don't want to sacrifice my goal for a short-term fix. Instead of that 6-beer Saturday, maybe have 1 or 2 BO. It's okay. The beer's always going to be there. My physical ability to do what I want is very finite. These tires only have so much tread. I have a window of a couple years to do what I want to do, or at least to take a shot at what I want to do. So go for it, and don't hold back. But it's tough, because life beats the shit out of you, and sometimes all you want is to turn your damn brain off. And what is booze and Netflix better at than turning your brain off for a few precious minutes? What I'm asking of myself is to keep reminding myself how badly I want this particular running goal. And I do. And my next book goal, which I do. And then make choices, not sacrifices, that get me moving in that direction. Because sacrifices make you feel like you're losing out. But what you're really losing out on is the potentiality of achieving that goal. Reach that goal. And then do a kick-ass keg stand. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.